I'm 23. My family and I moved to Michigan from the West Coast about 14 or 15 years ago when I was 9, and we've been here ever since.
I never have lived there, but for various reasons I've spent some time there, and it really is a beautiful place. Having said that, what was it like when you came to that sudden realization that a lot of the things that you've been told about how the world works are untrue?
I guess it wasn't kind of like a show-stopping moment where it all cumulatively came down and I realized nothing was how I thought it was. It all just slowly built up, and I just kind of realized that maybe the world isn't how I thought it was, and things that people say aren't real actually exist.
When you're growing up and your parents are trying to convince you that monsters don't exist, there's no reason to be looking under your bed every night when you are ready to go to sleep. You trust your parents, so you want to believe them. You grow up, you don't see any evidence that there are monsters out there, but unfortunately, when someone like you has an encounter that proves to you that they do exist, that's really got to have a way of turning your world upside down. What was it like when you suddenly came to the realization that monsters do in fact exist?
The world just kind of stopped for me. It made everything feel very unsafe.
It would have to be a life-altering experience. If you know that they're out there, then what else is out there that we're told does not exist? Are vampires real? Are any of the other things like that out there that are in our legends, are they real also? It really makes you wonder. You live in a unique area. Most of the people who run into these things, they have their encounters because they go someplace, they say they went hunting or they went camping. They went someplace to get into the woods, they had their encounter. After that encounter, they leave. That's not the case with you. Without talking about your actual encounter, please tell us about the area around your home, since you do live where you had your encounter in the first place.
I live in a very small farm town of less than 5,000 people, and sort of directly in the middle of our town, we have about 20 miles of forest. And my home is 20 feet in front of this forest, so we live very, very close to it. And we get hunters coming in every season to come hunt. So the woods here are always packed, and you're always hearing guns going off or some kind of ruckus back there. But it is a very solitary place.
Do you know how many people listening would kill to have 20 miles of forest 20 feet behind their bedroom wall? That's got to be amazing.
It sounds nice until you realize monsters are real.
Yeah, that is a good point. Once you realize that dogmen are out there having that wood so close, I guess that wouldn't be a good thing.
Nope, not anymore.
If that forest is 20 miles across, is it some form of a national preserve, a park? What's the story on that?
I don't think there's an actual name. I do know that it's been split up, and a lot of people own different chunks of the forest, so it's not like one big area owned by one person. It's split up across multiple people.
Being such a large area, do you know of any situations where people came up missing back there, or you know of any sightings of strange creatures back there, maybe?
I've never heard any stories about people seeing anything back there, but every now and then you'll hear a hunter talk about hearing something weird or the forest just going completely silent all of a sudden. But you don't hear too many reports of people seeing things.
Even if it did happen, they probably wouldn't come forward and talk about it. But let's get into this first encounter, McKenna. Please tell us all the details that come to mind, beginning with why you were at the location of the encounter in the first place.
The way my house is situated, my bedroom is at the very back of the house, meaning it's the closest to the woods. And I have several large windows that face directly towards the forest. and my bedroom is about 15 to 20 feet away from the tree line. So it was probably about 7, 8 in the morning in spring of 2013, and I had just kind of woken up for the day. I was still a little half asleep, and I'm just relaxing, trying to wake up, and just out of nowhere I hear what at first sounded like a St. Bernard or some sort of large dog just losing it at something. That kind of woke me up out of my lucid state. So at that point I was fully awake and looked out my window because I couldn't quite place the sound. So I was just continuing to listen, and I heard the bark again. And the more this larger dog barked, the more I could hear that it was a very large animal. In between these howls and barks of this larger dog, I can hear, it almost sounded like if a chihuahua could scream. It was a very odd sound. If you've ever heard a dog fight, it was almost exactly like that. So I'm kind of listening to this back and forth of this just monster dog doing something to this little dog. It sounds about 5 feet from my window because I can hear everything, and I can hear the deepness of the larger dog's growling in my chest. I listened to this continue for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then it stopped, just as quick as it started. There was no tapering off where you'd hear a hurt animal kind of whimper and run away. There was nothing like that. There was growling, there was screaming, and then it stopped. And it was gone. I just laid in bed for a few more minutes. I had no desire to look out the window, so I didn't. I just moved on and woke up a little bit more, took some time to kind of think about what I had just heard, and once my family was awake, I asked if anyone had heard a dog fight or, little dogs yipping in the yard, and no one had heard anything. So later in the day, maybe around 2 or 3, I kind of buck up the courage and I go outside to look around. I'm walking around my house, so now I'm in complete full view of the tree line. There's very small tufts of grass kind of lifted up that would make me think it was a rabbit or maybe a coyote, but there was no blood, there was no fur, there was no signs of violence that would make me think what I had heard that morning had actually happened. It was just a normal scene. None of my neighbors seemed to be out there looking around or alarmed. So I'm kind of thinking I was the only one who heard this event.
Did you ever hear from your neighbors that any of them were missing any small dogs, maybe?
Well, we had a family that lived down the road that had a lot of chihuahuas, but they never reported anything. So I'm kind of at a loss on that one.
That is really strange. Makes you wonder what that was all about. We haven't gotten into the second encounter or any of the other strange things that have happened at your property, but I wanted to throw this question at you anyway. Have you ever gotten frustrated that you seem to be the only person in your house who hears these things going on?
Oh yeah, it's extremely frustrating. I'm constantly being teased about hearing the werewolf in the backyard, or my boyfriend, the werewolf, is outside. It's annoying.
Yeah, that would be pretty frustrating. Common sense had to tell you, no, don't part the drapes and look out there and call attention onto yourself. But after the fact, as you have a chance to think about things like this, when curiosity has a chance to get the best of you, it's easy to kind of second guess your actions. Did you ever wind up regretting not looking out there after all and finding out once and for all what was going on?
Yeah, I do regret that.
Regretting it and deciding to act differently if the situation happened again, those are two totally different things. If that ever does happen again, do you think you will look out the window?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have my camera and everything ready.
be careful what you wish for.
For sure.
When you told your family members about what you had heard and any ideas on what you thought it might have been out there, what kind of a response did you get?
They didn't really believe me. They kind of thought I was just dreaming and woke up. But once I explained that I was actually fully awake and kind of laid out the encounter for them, they seemed to believe me a little bit more, but not to the point where they would help me look for anything. Just like, oh, okay, it was a dog fight. That's about it.
So their curiosity was piqued, but not enough to cause them to go out there and want to help you look for any evidence and clues to find out what exactly had happened.
Yeah, and I think that's because I was the only person to experience it. If my whole family had experienced, they would all be out there. But as I was trying to relay the event, I could just tell that they weren't interested.
I see. When you were growing up, did you have an interest in Bigfoot, things that go bump in the night, or anything else like that?
Not too much. I've always grown up around forests, so I've always been outside and playing, and I've never been scared or had thoughts that there were monsters in the woods or anything like that.
After you had your second encounter, without giving any details on what happened there yet, did you dive headlong into researching the Dogman topic, or did you just want to distance yourself from the topic the best you could?
No, I definitely started looking into it. Actually, once I had that encounter, I realized that dogmen were kind of Michigan's thing. I'd never heard of a dogman, never even seen anything about one until after I had my encounter. And that just really got me into looking into it and see if maybe what I had saw was a dogman.
After you started researching the Michigan Dogman and found out that there were so many sightings of them around you in your area, did that freak you out more than you already were? Or since you were hungry for information, was it kind of a good thing to find out that so many people in your area were seeing these things?
Definitely a little bit of both.
It might seem like a no-brainer that anyone that is asked that question would say, oh no, I was freaked out and hated the idea that so many of these things were being seen around me. But you have to take into consideration there are a lot of people who, instead of trying to distance themselves from dogmen as much as they can, they actually go out looking for them. A lot of them go out alone, so you never really know how someone's going to react after they find out that dogmen are real.
I was definitely interested to look up more and see if I could find out more about this thing, but I wasn't going to be venturing into the woods alone at any point soon.
Well, that's good news. I'm glad you're not going to be doing anything like that. That wouldn't be a good idea. All right, McKenna, let's get into the second encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. So this was about 3 months after the first one. It was about midnight, 1 a.m. I was driving home, and I had just pulled into my driveway. My driveway faces my tree line as well, but it's considerably further away, probably 50 or 60 feet away. I had my brights on, so I turn the corner and I pull into my drive, and my brights just completely illuminate the tree line. Before I go on too far, I'll give a little detail about the forest we have in my backyard. My mother and I, we didn't put a fence up. We planted blackberry and blueberry bushes along the front of the trees to kind of create a boundary. These bushes come up to about anywhere between navel or hip height on me, and I'm about 5'9". So back to my story. I pull into my driveway. The bushes are illuminated. Everything is completely lit up, and I can kind of see what looks like a Great Dane hunched over in one of the bushes. I can kind of make out shoulders. I can kind of just barely see the top fourth of its head, kind of just under the eyes, and then up to the ears. The reason I thought it was a Great Dane was the ears. It had very thin, very pointed ears. It was doing almost a shimmying movement in the bushes. It's very hard to describe. It was almost like it was bouncing up and down on its haunches while kind of wiggling its shoulders around. I kind of just watched for a few minutes trying to figure out if maybe this is a neighbor's dog that is stuck in a bush or is lost or something. And, if I sit here long enough, maybe the dog will come to me and I can take it back to the neighbor. So I'm just sitting in my car watching it. My car is still on, lights are still on, and it's just shimmying in this bush. 3 or 4 minutes go by, and I realize this dog is just going to keep dancing in this bush. So I turn my car off. My lights continue to stay on about 45 minutes after my car turns off. So I turn off the car and get out, and my lights are still on. All of a sudden, this thing is completely upright. There was no motion of standing up. It was just in the bush, and then it was standing. I can very, very clearly see that it is not a Great Dane. It kind of just stood there silently, didn't really make a noise, didn't really gesture towards me. It stood behind the bush, and we had a good stare down for a couple of seconds. I could make out quite a bit of what it looked like. The bushes that came to about navel height on me hit maybe about thigh height on this thing. And maybe it was just standing, but its arms were dangling further down in the bush. So on a normal human, when you're standing, your arms kind of stop at your thighs. But this thing's arms just kept going. I couldn't see the end of them. It was very, very dark black. It wasn't dirty or anything. It almost had like a terrier sort of coat. It had very short-looking hair. And the way my lights were reflecting off of it, it looked soaking wet, like it had just gotten done swimming. I know people say they smell something just awful or they'll feel unnaturally scared. I didn't feel any of these things. So while I kind of felt fear that there was an obvious monster 50 feet away from me, it wasn't something that was unnatural, if that makes sense.
When you say that it was not something that was unnatural, you're saying that it didn't have any supernatural appearance. It looked like it was a flesh and blood creature that was there in front of you.
Yeah, basically. It didn't make me feel any certain way unnaturally. It didn't look unnatural. It looked, if I could describe it, if a Doberman could have a fox snout on the body of a man with black fur. That's the best way I can describe it, honestly.
How long would you guess that muzzle was on it?
6 or 7 inches, maybe.
6 or 7, that's a pretty prominent muzzle. When you describe that muzzle as being fox-like in appearance, what are you saying? That it tapered to a fairly narrow point? What does that mean?
Well, when I first saw it, I thought it was a Great Dane, so I'd expected that large, sort of squared-off snout. This thing didn't have it. It had very thin, pointed, tapering snout.
Okay, I see. When this was all going on, after it stood up and you could get a better look at its face, did you notice any facial expressions as it was standing there looking at you?
No. We were both completely expressionless, just staring at each other.
Well, at least you got lucky. Some of these things are truly malevolent when they come face to face with an eyewitness, so at least it didn't do that and shake you up any more than it already did. Now, as it's standing there in the bush down on all fours, you mentioned that you couldn't see very much of it at all. After it stood up, though, what kind of body conformation did you notice?
It was almost like a bodybuilder's body, but covered in fur. It was very wide, very stocky.
When you say it was very wide, you are saying that it did have man-like shoulders then.
Yes, it had a bipedal body formation. It didn't have like the shoulders that came down. It definitely looked like it was made to stand on 2 feet like a person.
Was it standing by anything that would give you the ability to accurately guess how tall this thing was and how wide?
I'd say anywhere from 7 or 8 feet tall and at least 3 feet wide. It was massive.
Ooh, that is pretty big. Do you have any estimation on how much it weighed?
Oh gosh, at least over 200. It looked pretty big.
If it was that tall and that wide, it had to be quite a bit heavier than that even. I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to 3 or 4, but we'll never really know.
I just wanted to give a safe minimum just in case.
As all this was going on, you said it never did make any facial expressions at you. It was just a blank stare looking at you as you were right there staring right back at it. But through all of this, did it ever open up its mouth, or did it keep its mouth closed all the time?
It honestly looked like a photo. It didn't move a muscle. It was completely frozen. And then it just turned and silently walked away.
That's about the best thing it could have done. I'm glad it handled the situation that way instead of coming at you. That would have been even worse. Now, after all this happened, McKenna, who was the first person that you told about this? Did you go inside and wake everyone up in the house and let everybody know, or how'd that pan out?
Well, after it had walked away, I kind of stood there frozen. I wasn't quite sure what I had just saw, or if I should get in the car and drive away, or what. After about a minute of just kind of thinking about what I should do, I went inside. My mom picked up right away that something was wrong. And I kind of just said, oh, I hit an animal when I was driving home. I didn't want to tell her because I had already told her about the attack I had heard outside my window, and her reaction to that just made me not want to tell her about what I just saw.
I can understand that. You kind of didn't want to tell her or anyone else in the house because you were afraid of freaking them out then.
Yeah, and mostly just to kind of save myself because my family likes to pick.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, that does make sense. Really complicates things when something like that happens. When it was standing there as it turned to walk away, it probably gave you a pretty good chance to see if this thing had a tail or not. Did you notice one?
No, I didn't see one.
Okay. Earlier on, when you mentioned that it was down on all fours in the bushes, right there at the edge of the woods, and it was making that strange movement, that weird motion, do you have any opinions on what was going on there, why it was doing that?
Maybe it was digging at something erratically or scratching something, but it honestly looked like it was dancing in my blueberry bushes. That's the best way I can describe it.
As if seeing a dog man's not weird enough. For it to be doing that, that's just really strange and hard to figure out. When it was making that movement, you mentioned how you thought it might have been digging. Did it have its head down or head up? I know you said it was hard to see most of it, but you said you could see the top part of its head at least pretty well.
Yeah, the head didn't really go down low to the ground. That would make me think it was sniffing at anything. It just kind of bobbed up and down and moved side to side very tightly. So while I would think it would be digging, the shoulder movement would make me think it was digging. The head movement didn't match up.
We'll never know because you can't think for these things, but from how you're describing this, it makes me wonder if it wasn't moving like that to get your attention. Since it was black, like you said, it was nighttime, there's a good chance that you wouldn't have even noticed it, but if it made those strange motions, then that would get your attention and cause you to look its way.
It was definitely interesting. I really wish I could describe it more as dancing, or more than just dancing, but that's exactly what it looked like, shimmying in a blueberry bush.
Yeah, that is really strange. Now, in the pre-interview, you mentioned how strange its fur looked. Let's talk about this fur that you saw.
After I had looked up different Dogman encounters, I kind of saw that most of them said that these creatures had really shaggy fur, or there were patches missing, or they were mangy. This one didn't really look like that. It had a very, very short coat, very similar to a terrier, and it looked soaking wet. It was either very short-haired and wet, or this thing had no fur at all, and its skin was black.
Yeah, that is awfully strange. What did you notice from its eyes, eye color, anything like that that you can share?
It had very large, round, bright yellow eyes that just beamed out of its face.
How directly were your headlights hitting this thing as it was standing there on two legs looking at you?
It was standing almost directly in front of me, and my headlights lit up almost all of it, and I could see a lot of detail. But for some reason, it was making it a lot harder for me to see above the shoulders. I don't know if that was because of the foliage of the tree line or my headlights or something, but for whatever reason, it just seemed like above the shoulders, this thing was much darker or wasn't as accepting of light, but I couldn't make out as many details above the shoulders as I could the rest of its body.
The head, like you said, was clearly darker than its body, but did the body have all one shade to it, or were there splotches?
Just all one solid black color.
Okay. From the way you described its coat and how it had that wet look and it was still dark, I figured that was the case, but I thought I'd ask anyway. You told me in the pre-interview that you've been finding animals around your property in a strange state. What's been going on with them?
Yeah, a few months before my first encounter, so a few months before the spring of 2013, my mom and I had just drove home from camping, and we had pulled in our driveway. There was a lower half of a possum just sitting right in our driveway, and it looked like it had been ripped in half. It wasn't like a clean cut. So we just kind of looked at it. It was very interesting because it wasn't rotted. It didn't smell horrible. It looked very fresh. We could see this almost trail of guts leading to our backyard. So we walked back there, and we found the top half of the possum, sort of 2 or 3 feet in front of my room, but under my window. Again, like I said, it looked freshly killed. There was no bloating, no rotting, no flies. There was nothing on this thing.
If I didn't do what I do, that would strike me as being very strange, but I can't explain it for whatever reason. That's not all that uncommon for people who have dogmen around their properties. For example, the guest for episode number 9, he's the one that most recently told me about something like that happening. He found a squirrel that had been torn in half like that and left on his patio in a place where he clearly would discover it. He didn't see a dogman do that, but that's fairly commonly reported amongst people in your situation. Going back to your encounter, at any time did you feel any unnatural sense of panic? Now, seeing something like that in front of you, a dogman, that's going to shake anyone up. But when this was going on, or maybe even right before this encounter took place, did you feel this unexplainable, uncontrollable fear that had just hit you?
No, not at all. I drove into my driveway, and when I'd first seen it bouncing in the bush, nothing made me think something was not right. And even after I had seen it, obviously I was terrified, but it wasn't an unnatural feeling.
At any time, have you ever had any problems with bouts of uncontrollable fear?
Yeah, every now and then when I'm home alone, I'll just be doing something completely ordinary, and I'll feel like I just have to leave my house.
Oh, really? Please tell us more about that.
It's only happened maybe 3 or 4 times, and it was in 2013, 2014 when these happened. I would be doing the dishes or in the shower or just watching TV, and something would just make me feel like I was in danger for my life, and I had to leave my house.
I take it no one else was home when these incidents happened.
No, no one was ever home.
Wow. I can't imagine what that would be like. That's not good. Not only have you been having to deal with animals being ripped in half like that and left around your property, you've had this strange kind of activity with birds hitting your house at night. Tell us about that, please.
So around the same time of year, spring 2013, 2014, we all of a sudden had birds just start flying into the windows of our house every now and then. And at first I thought it was just because my mom has tons of feeders out in our yard, so maybe the birds were just flying around to get something to eat and hit a window. But one night I was just sitting in bed around 3 a.m. and it sounded like, almost like someone with a very large hand had smacked my window. I run outside and there's a dead turkey vulture laying underneath my window, and I can clearly see that this bird has crashed into my window and killed itself. I thought that was pretty out of the ordinary for one, just because it was a turkey vulture, and they're not the type of birds to do something like that. But then it happened again. That really set it off that something was not right. After the second turkey vulture incident, we started getting finches, cardinals, mourning doves, just small kinds of birds bouncing into our windows during the day. They wouldn't fly hard enough to kill themselves, but they would just kind of bounce off the window.
That is pretty strange. I live in an area where there are quite a few birds, and from time to time I'll have one hit the window, but not with any kind of irregularity. Before all this dogman activity started taking place, was it pretty common that you would have birds fly into your windows like that, or did it not start until after the dogman came around?
I mean, every now and then we'd get a bird fly into the window once every few months, but not to the point where it was happening multiple times a week.
So this was happening multiple times a week. That's pretty often for something like that to happen. Turkey vultures do have excellent eyesight. Tests reveal they have eyesight that's just as good as black vultures. It's just so hard for me to believe that not just one turkey vulture, but two turkey vultures would fly into your window like that. Now, having said that, dogmen have thrown cats against houses. That does seem to be something that they do. I don't know why, but they just seem to do it. From what you're talking about here, it sure makes you wonder if it's not a dogman doing that. I hate to be the person to jump to conclusions and say that everything that's done in an area where you know dogmen are is going to lay at the feet of the dogman. That's why it happened. We didn't see what caused those birds to hit that window, but it sure does make you wonder when you've got a situation like that that just does not make sense to have that many birds hitting your window, and especially having finches and cardinals, which aren't all that active at night. They might fly a little bit, but it's not like they make their living at night. They're diurnal. They do most of their activity during the day.
Yeah, it was very interesting, to say the least. And I guess what made the whole thing even more curious for me is our house is one story. We don't have a second or a third story where a turkey vulture would maybe accidentally hit the window. We are a first-story home.
Yeah, that is really hard to explain and figure out. Like I said, unless it was seen throwing birds into your window, I don't want to necessarily jump to the conclusion that that's what it had to be that was going on and was consequently causing that. Having said that, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just be careful when you're out in the woods. Don't go alone.
Yeah, no matter what your situation is, that's always good advice. Well, McKenna, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing all those details with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been great having you here. Have yourself a great night.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we get started, if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Dark Waters. Dark Waters, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vic. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I go by Dark Waters. I am the narrator and creator of the Dark Waters horror channel on YouTube, something that I really, really enjoy doing, and it gives me an opportunity to work with people and speak with various people and kind of get their experiences. And then what I do is I take those experiences and I bring them to life via audio and try and make it as realistic as possible so the listeners can get an opportunity to kind of be and feel what happened to them, kind of be in that setting and that environment, but safely be in that space and still experience that encounter.
It goes without saying that most shows of this kind on YouTube consist of interviews, whether supposed experts on given cryptids are being interviewed or actual eyewitnesses. You've gone in a different direction. Tell us about why you decided to go the way that you did.
Well, my background is in the radio business. I used to be a syndicated financial talk show host. So I developed a very good set of skills in communicating with people and meeting people and making friends. And through that radio show, I developed a very strong network. So as opposed to doing what everybody else is doing on YouTube, which is taking a story and just narrating it, what I do is I literally investigate the story. So I sit down and meet with the people who've had their encounters and kind of do an interview with them, talk to them, go through the emotional ups and downs with them, and then I create the narration and add sound effects and try as much as I can do to bring it to life. I just feel that in a world where people are afraid to kind of talk to each other and sit down, where everybody's texting and emailing and just good old-fashioned man-to-man, man-to-woman conversation is just something that's an oddity these days, and it's something that I like to do. So I love people and I love talking to them. That's the perspective that I've taken for my channel, and I think it's very unique. And I think you can tell by the stories that I do have because the accounts are so realistic as opposed to, you know, someone reading something off Reddit or some recycled story that they've heard on the internet somewhere.
I really love the approach you've taken on your show. When I discovered it recently, not only was I sitting there thinking to myself, wow, these are some really good stories about dogmen, the fact that it's not a conventional format, it really impressed me. The job that you did narrating these stories just blew me away.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really, really do. I work hard at it.
Oh, it shows. Before we get into the actual encounters, what types of stories do you cover?
I cover the gambit. As you know, I have several Dogman stories. I have a few Bigfoot stories that are there. I have a lot of true horror stories, things like home invasions, paranormal stuff where, you know, they're poltergeist type things that are covered. The advantage that I really believe I have, Vic, is that I am in Louisiana, and I'm actually in New Orleans, which is a paranormal hotspot, and it's a hotbed, and no one can deny that. And so the strange and eerie things that happen in this city and the surrounding areas, it just gives me so much to pull from and so many people to talk to at any point in time. So it really gives me a lot. You won't find just one genre of horror with me. You won't just find one thing. You'll find a gambit. You'll find everything. And you'll always be entertained when you tune into my channel because there's always going to be something different. You know, we have some Bigfoot encounters coming up. Then we have some true stalking stories coming up where guys are being stalked by the police department. I mean, these are real experiences from real people. And so there is no given direction because each person has a different story. So I can't say, hey, I'm going to just cover this because the next person I talk to may tell me, hey, I was abducted by an alien. So it just depends on, I actually go with what is presented to me. And that gives the variety to the channel. And I think that variety is something that people will really enjoy.
I know I've listened to almost every video on your channel. There might be one or two non-Dogman related stories I haven't listened to yet, but I've yet to find one that's not top-notch. Since we are here to talk about Dogmen, though, I want to get into what started all this. Taylor, Mississippi has got all kinds of crazy Dogman-related activity going on around it right now. Please tell us what you would care to share about what you know about that.
Just to give you some background, just getting into Dogman, I had heard about Dogman, but I didn't know much about it. But in the process of gathering one story, I met a gentleman who had recently had an experience that set me down the road into looking into Dogman. So when I started doing my research, just to find out more about the topic, it turned out that there was a video out there that was a news story talking about experiences that people were having in Taylor, Mississippi with Dogmen, where this lady had a picture of a Dogman that she had taken. People were calling the Rougarou, which is the Cajun version of a werewolf. So I reached out to my network and started trying to find someone who was in the Mississippi area that may have had one of those experiences. And that's how I ended up finding someone working in Taylor who had an experience. Actually, I found two people who've had experiences with Dogmen, and those are some very frightening experiences that people have had.
Yes, they are. Knowing what happened, they are some really scary stories to hear. Let's talk about how you found out about the Dogman topic in the first place. From what I understand, you were talking to this unsettling looking guy in a cigar shop. That's how you found out that Dogmen existed.
Exactly. So a friend of mine owns a cigar shop here in New Orleans, and so he and I are talking, and he's sharing some stories from his days as a DEA agent dealing with some very high-profile criminals. That guy, by the way, was one of the longest. I think he holds the record for being a DEA agent undercover for the longest in the history of the United States. He was undercover longer than anybody ever has been, and he still holds that record. So he's telling me his stories. I'm going through my interview process and writing down notes and jotting down different things. And while we're talking, a gentleman just sitting across from us, smoking a cigar, he has this look about him. And it's that ex-military look that, you know, I was in war look. I will snap your neck in a heartbeat. I jumped out of helicopters and planes. He just has that look about himself. And he just asked me, he said, "Hey, are you paying for those stories?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not paying for the story." You know, he's like, "Well, I have a story I want to share with you, but you won't believe it." So I tell him, I smile and say, "You know, try me. I might believe it." He said, "Well, I'm not going to tell you the story for free." So I said, "Well, I'm not paying you money, but I'll pay you in cigars." So I go get him a few cigars, hand it to him, sit down and start talking with him. And he starts bringing me down this black hole of this experience that he had with the dog man in New Orleans East, outside this neighborhood called Little Woods on a levee. That's how I got introduced to it. And just to be honest with you, Vic, when it came, and I say that in past tense, when it came to the subject of dog man, I didn't believe it. I was very skeptic. You know, when the guy's telling me a story, I'm like, he's out of his mind. But what convinced me about his story that he was telling me is this guy's clearly looking at him, looking at his posture, his demeanor. He clearly was military. The look in his eyes was the look of a man who had been to war and who wasn't a coward. He wasn't really afraid of anything. I have some friends who've been in the military, and anyone who knows someone who's been in military combat, you know that all conflict starts and begins with the eyes, and their eyes are different than the normal human being's eyes, a normal person, a civilian's eyes. Their eyes are different. You can tell that they're burdened. You can tell that there's a certain level of fearlessness behind their eyes, and that's what I was looking at. Everything about him registered mercenary, I go kill people for the government type person. But when he started sharing his story, he started to get nervous. His eyes welled up a little bit. You could see he was getting very emotional. His hands started shaking a little bit. And all these things let me know that something truly happened to him. I wasn't there with him, so I can't say exactly, but something scared the hell out of this man. Getting to know him later and talking to him more and verifying that he is a war vet. He was an Army Ranger. Rangers go into combat and do some very, very vicious things on behalf of our country. Just to see that physical and emotional reaction from him let me know that something happened to him. And so I proceeded to recreate his story for him and put it out to the world. And when he heard the story, the first thing he said was it brought him back to exactly what happened. He said he listened to it once, he couldn't listen to it again, and he refused to listen to it anymore. So I think I did a great job of recreating his story. And one thing about the guys that I've done the stories for who've had these dogman encounters, each one of them says, "Hey, you did a great job of recreating the story, but I could never listen to it again." So these guys are severely traumatized behind this. That's another signal that something really happened to them. So that's how I got into the dogman, was with that one conversation. That made me really, really aware of it and made me start looking into it and looking for more of it.
When people visit your channel wanting to listen to that story, what's the name of that story so that they can easily find it?
It's the Dogman of Bayou Sauvage, because the incident happened at the Bayou Sauvage Wildlife Refuge, which is on the outskirts of New Orleans East. And it's just a swampy, marshy, kind of forested wetland area that runs parallel to, and it's really a crazy story because this guy's on a levee. On the left side of the levee is Lake Pontchartrain, which is a lake that you can fish in. On the right side of the levee is this wildlife refuge, which is forested wetland and marshes, and he's out in the middle of nowhere on this levee when this encounter happens. And he has to somehow get himself back to his vehicle on foot to get away from this. So it's Dogman of Bayou Sauvage.
Like all of your other stories on that channel, it is a really creepy one. It'll leave an impression on you, to say the least.
It really is.
The first story from your channel I'm going to play tonight involves a father and son who were out fishing in the Louisiana bayou one night. Please set this story up for us.
Okay, just to give you some background on that, when I started the channel, some of my friends started to subscribe. And when they heard that first Dogman story, a sheriff out of Port Sulphur, Louisiana, contacted me and said, hey, there's these two guys that you really should talk to, father and a son, who had an encounter. And so I reach out to them, and we hold a conversation. And these are Cajuns. And for those who don't know what a Cajun is, some people think it as a derogatory name here in Louisiana. But a Cajun is just someone who's from southeast Louisiana, and they all grew up in the marshes and the wetland areas of Louisiana, and they call themselves Cajun. Bobby Hebert, who was the Saints quarterback, they call him the Cajun Cannon because he was a Cajun. Not a derogatory comment or a word. It's just that they're Cajuns. That's how they identify themselves. So this father and his son, they're avid fishermen. So they go out fishing, and as the sun's going down, they start heading home. But their motor won't start. And then this dog man actually steps out from behind a tree, which really, really, really blew this guy's mind, because now he's looking at this giant werewolf. They freak out. What I find interesting about that story and about that account is all these dogman encounters that happen in the bayou, it happens around the areas where the levees are. And for people who are not familiar with New Orleans and southeast Louisiana, I know people are familiar with the fact that, we're prone to flood. So what happens is we are protected by federal levees, which are these essentially a giant mound of dirt that's anywhere between 10 to 12 feet tall. And it seems like these dogmen, they use these levees to travel along the bayous. I guess that's their way of traveling through the marshlands without, actually being in the water. So it seems like every time someone has one of these experiences in Louisiana, it's near a levee. And it makes sense because the levee is kind of a natural game trail as well, because anything that's trying to move through there, if it can find solid land to move along, you can move along solid land. So it seems like these encounters really, really happen anywhere there's a levee. And in their case, similar to the very first guy who had Lake Pontchartrain on his left and the Bayou Sauvage on his right, these guys were in a waterway with a levee on their left and with the wetlands and marsh on their right. So it seems like when we start talking about Louisiana, these things are really found where there are natural game trails or ways to where they can kind of move back and forth, which is the levee, which that really is the natural way that you would move through the marsh.
When the listeners have a chance to listen to this story, they'll understand what I mean when I say it's extra creepy. What's the name of that story on your channel?
I think that one is Two Louisiana Fishermen's Dogman Encounter.
Let's go ahead and play that story for the listeners now.
When I was told by my friend that you were not critical of him when he told you about his dogman experience, at first I was skeptical. However, after speaking with you, I realized that you are the real deal. This encounter I'm going to share with you can be verified by my 19-year-old son. Both my son and I are what you call Cajuns here in Louisiana. I spend the majority of my free time hunting and fishing in the bayous of southeast Louisiana. Per our agreement, I am not disclosing exactly where this happened. I still have to live and work in this area, but I will do my best to paint a clear picture of the surrounding. It was early August and my son and I had spent the entire day fishing. I have an 18-foot Alumacraft boat with a Yamaha 40 motor. On the front I mounted a trolling motor. It is a Minnesota Cota 45-pound thrust battery-powered setup. The max speed on this motor with two people on my boat is 12 miles per hour through calm waters. It was just turning dark when our encounter began. The Yamaha 40 motor on my boat was known to stall, so my son and I always tried to get out of the bayous before dark. As expected, the Yamaha 40 was stalling and slow to crank up. As I pressed the ignition, she wouldn't turn over. We didn't want to flood the engine, so instead we began using the trolling motor to travel along the bayou to head home. It was no big deal, we had done this many of times. It did mean that a 20-minute ride through the bayou would now take an hour. We were rounding a bend near the levee when everything went quiet. My son brought it to my attention. "Papa, listen," he said. "Everything is so quiet." There was not a sound, no birds, crickets, no fish splashing. The only sound was the steady hum of the trolling motor. In order for you to understand what happens next, I have to explain the area we were in. The levee is for storm surge protection. It's 12 to 15 feet tall in spots along this waterway. The levee is on our left-hand side. On our right-hand side is primary forested wetland. The bayou we were traveling down was about 75 yards wide maximum, but narrowed down to 35 yards wide in long stretches. We were in a long stretch where it was about 50 yards wide. Like I was saying, it had just turned dark and the area of the bayou we were trolling became extremely quiet. My son was on edge, as he operated the trolling motor on the front of the boat. I can't tell you why, but a sense of fear washed over me. My son was feeling it too as he suggested we try and start the Yamaha motor. We trolled along for another 10 minutes before I started hearing something paralleling us in the wetlands to the right. The movement was loud, but it was low to the ground and I just thought it was a hog working his way through the wetlands. Moving at medium speed, which for this trolling motor was 6-8 miles per hour, I felt uncomfortable and afraid, but not like my life was in danger. That all changed when my son shined the floodlight into the marsh. Eyes were looking back at us. The eye shine was a combination of yellow and gold. They were low to the ground. I've been hunting in the marsh my entire life and this size and color eyes shine was not familiar to me. At this point we were in a bit of a situation. We had no weapon, frankly, because until this night I felt no need for one when out fishing in the bayou. The trolling motor was battery operated, so running it at maximum speed of 12 miles per hour would only deplete the battery before we got back to the boat launch. We had an unknown animal following us in the bayou at night. This was evolving to be some straight horror movie type. I tried the ignition again on the Yamaha 40, but she would not start. So my son steered us to the far side of the bayou to put some distance between us and this creature. He suggested that I steer the trolling motor while he worked on the Yamaha. Now at the bow, I shined the floodlight into the marsh again, trying to get a better look at the animal. Expecting the eye shine to be low to the ground, at first I saw nothing, but as I fumbled the light a bit it shinned upwards and the eyes were now up higher. Stupidly I slowed the boat down to take a closer look. The animal was staying just outside of the light reach. We had almost come to a complete stop when it stepped forward to the edge of the bank. What I saw was only supposed to be a folk story. It was a werewolf. It was jet black, and its eyes were terrifying. The upper body was lean, with pronounced shoulder muscles. It was using its front paw to hold back a tree branch from its face. This thing looked 8 feet tall, its nose was black and moist, and could see the nostrils move as it breathed. The snout was longer and wider than anything I have ever seen on a dog. Now completely terrified, turned the motor speed back up, trying to move away. That is when the skin along the ridge of its snout began to wrinkle and it showed its teeth. Then it took a deep breath and began to growl. The fur on its chest shook as it let out the worst sound I ever heard in my life. Although it was a good 45 yards away on the opposite bank, I felt this growl in my internal organs. It was so strong. The level of fear I felt was like nothing I had ever experienced in my life. It was like being a kid again and learning that monsters are real. This fear was so intense, I wanted to jump out the boat and swim to the levee and run. My son, now aware of what was tracking us, worked frantically on the Yamaha, trying to get to the fuel filter. This thing walked on its hind legs along the bank for the next 20 yards, before it was forced to cut back into the marsh because of a small cove. Now out of sight, I asked my son what the situation with the motor was. He had just got the fuel filter out and was flushing it with fresh fuel. He only had to insert it again and reassemble part of the motor. Knowing I had a good 10 minutes before he was done, I turned the trolling motor to its maximum speed. I wanted to make sure that this animal was not able to meet us on the bank once it circled around the cove. For the next few minutes things felt normal. The crickets, birds, and other sounds of the bayou were back again. But this feeling was short-lived as the animal let out a howl from the back of the cove, almost as to let us know it was still coming for us. We both could hear this thing tearing through the wetland, loud splashes, trees and brush breaking. It was headed our way, and this time at full speed. Nervously, I told my son we need to get that motor going now. "Yes, sir, almost done," he replied. The sounds were getting closer. Shining the light ahead of the boat, I realized that we were not being stalked, but hunted. We were entering a section of the bayou where the waterway narrowed to about 35 yards across. This particular section would only take 3 minutes to navigate with a normal motor. With this trolling motor we were screwed. I felt like a sitting duck as the sound of this thing could be heard rounding the cove and headed straight for us. The sound of my son trying to turn over the motor provided some relief, but she was still not starting. He paused for a second, threw the motor in reverse, hit the ignition, and she started. We were saved. Looking into my son's eyes, he was shaken, but he never looked back as we sped off. When we arrived at the boat launch and pulled the boat out the water, my son looked me square in the eye and said, "Was that a werewolf?" Yes, it was. It had to be. We talked about it on the ride to the local bar for a beer. The next morning he took that Yamaha 40 to the motor shop where it was completely rebuilt. It cost us $350, but I won't ever be in that situation again. We upgraded the trolling motor as well to a stronger gas version. Staying in the bayou after dark is no longer an option for us. Of course we are scared when we go out fishing now. However, we are well armed with Russian AK-47 rifles, shotguns, and flares. If it ever shows up again, it will be the one doing the running, not us.
Now that we've heard that story, is there any background information you'd be willing to share with us?
Yes, in that particular case, the son was severely traumatized by that encounter, and he's had to have psychiatric counseling because of what he experienced. And the reason being is that the son was at the back of the boat, and all the pressure was on him trying to get them to safety because he was the one who knew how to take the engine apart. So, again, it just goes to show how traumatizing these experiences have been for people, and it's very, very traumatizing. I can personally tell you it's traumatizing.
Well, we're going to show how traumatizing these encounters can be when we play your encounter later on in the show. The next story I want to play involves a lineman's experience late one night. Please set this story up for us.
That's a good one. The lineman, this is when we start getting into the incidents that are happening in Taylor, Mississippi. So a friend of mine named David ended up connecting me with Skip, and Skip is the lineman in the story. Skip gave me all the details of his story. We talked, and essentially what happened to Skip was Skip is a distribution lineman, and for those of you who don't know what distribution lines are, those are the power lines that actually bring power to your home. Sometimes you have underground lines, sometimes you have above ground lines. But anyway, so Skip is a distribution lineman, and he works in a bucket truck. And those are the trucks that you drive down the road, they hop out, they get in the back of the bucket, they can remotely control that bucket and elevate themselves up to 20-something feet in the air, 30 feet in the air in order to work on a power line. So Skip is working on a distribution line that heads down into Taylor, Mississippi, because there's an outage. And as he gets into a certain area, he elevates himself and he starts to hear what sounds like things moving around in the bushes around him. After meeting him and hanging out with Skip, Skip is not, he's an outdoorsman, so Skip is not really shaken by things in the woods, but according to Skip, the motion and what was going on, it was all around him. And his encounter starts to get very, 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 very unnerving real quickly. He's inside a bucket truck, elevated 20-something feet in the air with a work light on, and I don't know if you've ever had a light shining up towards you, you know that your pupils, your eyes are focused. They kind of, the light affects your eyes. So you can't look from that bright light out into the darkness and see anything. So he's up in this bucket truck working on a power line with the light on, and he sees a dog man. Skip is not, he's an outdoorsman. And I won't say he's a tough guy, but you can definitely tell he's the kind of guy that would go out and sit in the blind at 5 o'clock in the morning and wait on a deer and probably wouldn't be scared at all. I couldn't do that, but he could. So it's a very, very interesting story. I don't do it justice with that short summary because I left out a lot of details, but you'll hear all the minute details that I'm leaving out.
I can't even begin to imagine what Skip went through when all that was going on. As I was sitting there listening to that story, I was trying to imagine how I would have handled that situation. And yeah, peeing down my leg, I'm sure that's one thing on the list that would have been done. And who knows what else? Maybe a Charmin moment also. It's a really good story. What's the name of that story before we play it?
Mississippi Dogman Encounter is the name of that story.
Mississippi Dogman Encounter. Let's take a listen.
My encounter happened in 2013. I was working for Mississippi Power and Light as a distribution man. I live in Oxford, Mississippi, and worked the surrounding area to ensure that both the University of Mississippi and the small towns in the vicinity are kept energized. For the most part, my job was very laid back. However, every now and then we would get a storm system that would roll through the area and devastate the outdated distribution lines. It was a Saturday morning after a 3-day storm system had passed, knocking out power from Oxford, Mississippi to Taylor, Mississippi. Just for your information, transmission lines carry large voltages of power over big distances to substations, and distribution lines carry power from substations to residential homes. The section I was assigned to fix was out of TVA substation that runs along Old Taylor Road. This was a 10-mile stretch of line that supplied power to the small town of Taylor, Mississippi. Anyway, it's Saturday morning. I'm in my bucket truck working a line along Old Taylor Road. I was inside my bucket changing a line insulator when I heard movement in the wood line across the road. I didn't pay much attention to it. I would always hear animals moving around in the woods when I worked. The movement went on for about 5 minutes, moving north to south. The repairs went on all day, and by evening, I was near the small town of Taylor. Let me pause for a minute and share a little bit more information with you. When I repair distribution lines, I do so from an elevated position inside a bucket attached to an extendable arm that lifts me 25 feet in the air. The maximum height it can extend to is 35 feet, something I learned later that night. As darkness fell, I was offered a cup of coffee by one of the locals. His name was Nathan, but he told me to call him Nate. He said that people in the area were nervous and wanted the power back on. When I asked him what people were nervous about, he just changed the subject and insisted that I give him a time when the power would be back on. Realistically, I needed another 3 hours before I could radio back to the substation in Oxford and have them energize the line. I'm not sure why, but I lied to Nate. I told him 2 hours. Maybe it was the fact that he was so panicky when he was talking to me. Anyway, things were uneventful until I got to the south side of the small city of Taylor. I pulled up to a pole, exited the truck, and bam! The minute I got out of the truck, I could feel it. Something was wrong. My hair stood up on my arms. The hairs on my back of my neck stood up. I started to sweat. Something was wrong. I climbed into the bucket, elevated myself, and went to work. Up high in the bucket, I felt safe and began to focus on my job. But then I started hearing sounds, the sounds of footsteps to the north and to the south of me. Keep in mind, I'm elevated 25 feet in the air with the working light. After a few minutes of hearing noises, I decided it was best to turn my light off so I could see what was going on around me. The noises continued. and as my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, I saw what looked like two black figures crossing the road ahead of me. Now, I'm no coward, but under these circumstances, what is a man supposed to do? I sat there and listened and watched as these black figures moved back and forth across the roads and in and out of the wood lines. The only thing I could think to do was to elevate myself higher and wait it out. My radio was inside the truck along with my cell phone, and I was clearly surrounded by something. As I sat there in my bucket, I noticed the power line next to me begin to sway from left to right, but there was no wind. The sway turned into a full swing within a few minutes, which only could happen if someone or something was moving one of the power poles on the line. Now, this really freaked me out. So I stood up in a bucket and stared down the road trying to see the other poles. Like I said, it was dark out, but it looked like something big and black was leaning against one of the poles to the south of me. I needed to see what the was going on at this point in time. I took the flare gun out of my emergency kit, loaded a flare, and shot it in the air. No, I must be seeing things. It's been a long day. Hallucinating. I am hallucinating. No. Looking around me, there were amber eyes, 5 sets of 2 to be exact. They were to the north, south, east, and west of me. Also, to the south of me, something huge and black was rubbing its back against the wooden power pole. The eyes all followed the flare as it fell from the sky. I quickly sat down in my bucket, trying to hide myself from view. At this time, I'm panicking. What the are these things? It's not a bear. It's not a human. I don't know what this is. My mind tried to tell me that it was a person in a black coat. No. This looked like a big wolf standing on 2 legs, rubbing his back on a pole. The next question I asked myself was, how in the was I going to get out of here? I had no radio because it's in the truck. I had no cell phone because I left that in the truck. I decided just to sit there and try and wait it out. In an attempt to comfort myself, I said, they don't know you're here. They're just animals. Right? Animals, just animals. Finally, after telling myself over and over that they did not know I was here, they were just animals, I heard what sounded like a small rock hitting the side of my metal bucket. Then another rock hit the bucket. Then another. And then another. And then what sounded like a shower of gravel hitting the bottom of my bucket. Now, I'm panicking again. What the These are using me as target practice. I was so afraid, I have to admit, that I pissed my pants. I didn't know what to do. I knew one thing, I wasn't getting down from this bucket. I knew another thing, something that looked like a wolf was using my bucket as target practice. So I just sat there. It was so much happening at once. The power line was still shaking. The rocks being thrown in my bucket. Movement everywhere. I couldn't figure out what to do. Then it hit me. I loaded another flare, stood up, and shot it out over the trees into the woods. In the light, I could see 4 of the biggest wolves I ever seen in my life running off following the flare. On the road, just about 35 to 40 feet in front of my truck stood a nightmarish animal. This was a wolf, jet black, 7 to 8 feet tall, 2 pointed ears on the top of its head, standing on its back legs. Its shoulders were massive. Its arms had biceps like a man would. The arms were long, very long, and the claws were like a raccoon's, kind of like a hand, but they were huge. It just stood there as the light from the flare faded and looked at me. I got the sense that this thing was evil, also that it was the leader, and more so that it was pissed that I tricked the others into running into the woods. It kind of cocked his head to the left and scowled at me with this look of disgust, like a person would. Then cocked it to the right, showing his teeth, and growling before it sprinted off in the direction of the others. I shot a third and a fourth flare in their direction, lowered myself down in the bucket, climbed through the back window of the truck, cranked her up, floored it, pulling off. I radioed my boss back at the substation and told him that I was unable at this point in time to finish the line work. Nope, he insisted that I return to finish the job. Now, I couldn't tell my boss that I had just saw a werewolf, so the least he could do was send me out an extra person to help me finish out the line work. He agreed, and so I drove back to the main highway and waited to meet Ed, one of our other distribution linemen. By 10:30, Ed arrived, and we went back to the area. I told Ed some weird things were happening, but he just shrugged it off and said, "Let's get her done." As soon as we exited the trucks, the howls started. And when I say howls, these were loud. We only had 2 final poles to repair, so we hurried and worked as quickly as possible. There was movement all around us, but this time the headlights were on both vehicles, and the animal stayed just outside the range of the lights. Ed didn't say anything. He just put his headphones on and worked fixing the poles about 50 yards away from me. I could see the shadows moving around his truck. He never looked down, he just worked. When he finished, he lowered himself, got in the truck like nothing was going on, and drove over to me. Ed sat there with his windows rolled down and waited for me to get finished. He phoned the substation and had them energize the line. Then he asked me to meet him for coffee back at the substation. When I arrived, he handed me a cup of coffee, looked me square in my eye, and said I should never have been in Taylor at night. He told me about these things called dogmen, creatures who were half wolf and half man. He said that these things came down out of Tennessee during the summertime and would hunt deer, especially around Paulides Lake and in the Holly Springs National Forest. He seemed to know a hell of a lot about these creatures. He went on to share with me that he was born and raised in Taylor, Mississippi, and that these things had been a problem for years. And he gave me one piece of advice: never go anywhere near Taylor, Mississippi at night.
Is there any background information you'd be able to share with us about that one?
Yeah, I can give you some inside baseball on Skip because I spent a good amount of time with him in person. And when I say that Skip is an outdoorsman, he really, really is an outdoorsman. He's an avid hunter, a deer hunter. He spends a lot of time in the woods. I mean, when I say a lot of time in the woods, I mean, he's one of those guys that you know all he does is hunt. And Skip actually had heard about these dogmen, but he didn't believe in them. So that was one of the interesting things about Skip's encounter. He actually heard about it, and he had heard there were things going on in Taylor and in that area, especially Lake Paulides, which if someone looks on a map, I want to say Lake Paulides is northwest of Taylor, or maybe it's southwest, one of the two. But especially in the Lake Paulides area, he heard about it, but he didn't believe it. And so now he's an avid believer in dogman, but he's not a person that's going out really looking for him. He's somebody who's having a hard time hunting now. And he says he has a very hard time sitting in the blind now because every time he hears a noise, he thinks it's a dog man. So I can completely understand that happening to someone after the type of experience that he had.
After hearing what Skip went through out there that night, I don't think anyone would have a hard time understanding why he'd have such a hard time going out into the woods and doing the things he used to take for granted.
Not at all.
This last story I'm going to play covers the details of your own personal encounter. Instead of having you set this one up, what I want to do is I'm going to play the encounter, and then afterwards going to have you reveal any details you'd be willing to share with us about what happened.
Do I believe in the dog man? To be perfectly honest with everybody, the answer is no. I believe in the paranormal? Yes, absolutely. And I have a very healthy respect for it all. Which is why you rarely hear me have any stories about ghosts or demons on this channel. Frankly, I'm afraid of them. So when the reports of dogman sightings came in from Taylor, Mississippi, and I found out that there was actual TV news footage talking about the problems that the people in Taylor were having, I jumped at the opportunity to talk with Skip, the lineman in the story. To give you some background, Skip is a friend of a friend. A guy named David Dunbar, who I've known for a few years, contacted me when he subscribed to the Dark Waters channel. David and Skip go back 20 years. So in my mind, it was all good. I trust David. David trusts Skip. It was a real simple solution to the problem. I can talk to Skip. So Skip and I had a Skype conversation when it was time to talk about his experience. He presented it. We went back and forth, and I had many questions. And then I created the Mississippi Dogman video that you all have listened to. By the way, if you haven't seen it, take a look in the description below, and the Dogman video is there. Talking to Skip, he claims that I nailed it 100% when it comes to his experience. The sounds, the exact layout of what happened, I was able to accurately paint a picture of what he experienced. So for you guys who haven't listened to that, go ahead and take a listen. Anyway, in that Skype conversation, Skip left an invitation for me to come to Oxford, Mississippi, then travel to Taylor, Mississippi with him right before sundown. My encounter starts with that invitation. Like I said, I was not a true dogman believer. I acknowledge that people are having encounters with something, but I have to see these things for myself. So I left on a Friday, headed to Oxford, Mississippi, and 5 cigars later, I was checking into the Super 8 motel. Yes, this is a low-budget operation, more of a micro-budget type thing going on right here. I checked the mattress on the bed for bugs, looked under the bed for dead bodies, and went straight to sleep. I was meeting Skip for breakfast that next morning, so I needed some rest. We met that morning at a place called Big Bad Breakfast. He was a few minutes late, but nothing to be upset about. I was excited and was on my 3rd cup of coffee by the time he arrived. We talked and talked, ate breakfast, and at first the conversation was kind of slow. You see, Skip is a northern Mississippi boy, and I'm more of a city boy from New Orleans. So it took a little time for he and I to gel. However, once we started talking about the Dark Waters channel, Skip really opened up. He wanted to know about many of the encounters that I have on the channel, and he wanted inside baseball on how I met these people. 20 minutes later, Skip and I were sitting there laughing like old childhood friends. And things were going well until the conversation pivoted towards his dogman encounter and how we were going to visit the site. Skip's body language immediately changed. He started to get real tense, and he kind of clammed up, and I asked him, I said, "Are you okay?" He strained through his teeth saying yes, and we set a time for us to meet later that evening. I returned to the Motel 8, talked to my girlfriend on the phone, watched a little TV, and took a nap. We were supposed to be meeting at 3:45. Skip arrived at 4 o'clock, and we started the 15-minute ride down to Taylor, Mississippi. Old Taylor Road is a 2-lane highway. 1 lane going north, 1 lane going south. This roadway is kind of spooky in the daytime, so I can imagine how it was at night for him. The trees and bushes kind of overhang to the side of the road, to the point to where if you stuck your hand out the window, you can actually touch one of the tree branches. We rode along the roadway very slowly, and it was pretty much no traffic. The only thing that passed us was a funeral procession, And in true Mississippi tradition, we pulled to the side of the road and let the funeral procession pass, paying our respects to the dead. We talked as we rode down the road, and we even stopped at private properties where people had recently had dogman experiences. We didn't go in and talk to anyone, but we stopped and looked over the property. Right at about 5:45, we made our way to the section of road in which he had his encounter. To describe it, at this point, there's a slight bend in the road as it makes a sharp curve about 200 to 300 yards up ahead. We stood there in the middle of the road, talking about his experience and him telling me about some other things that he heard about that happened down at Sardis Lake. The sun was starting to go down behind the trees, and it was just starting to get dark. Now, guys, Doc Waters, I am not an outdoors man at all. The most I do in the woods is go to the gun range with my friends who are Marines and kind of fire a few rounds down range. But as far as hanging out in the woods, that's not something that I do. However, my senses are very acute, and I like to believe that I have a very, very, very good radar when it comes to danger. Standing there in the road as the sun started going down, I did start feeling that it was a dangerous situation, but nothing had happened that really made me nervous thus far. We stood there talking, and I watched the sun fall behind the trees. Skip was talking a little bit more about his encounter as the sun set behind the trees and it turned dark. I don't believe that Skip noticed that everything had gone quiet. Prior to things going silent, the area was very lively. There were crows on the power lines squawking. There was a dog in the background. You could hear him barking a ways off, and just the normal sounds of the forest. But things went deadly quiet. When I say quiet, deadly quiet, almost like in a vacuum. Skip didn't seem to notice it at first. He just kept talking and talking and talking. Up on the power lines were two black crows. Could barely still see them as the sun set behind the trees and it got dark. They just sat there staring off into the woods, almost like they were looking at something. Looking up at the birds, I got an ominous feeling. I turned my attention back to Skip to continue to listen to what he was saying. That's when the two crows took off flying away, squawking like they were crazy, almost as if to warn us that something was coming our way. By now, Skip was feeling it too, because he started backing away and moving towards a truck. That's when we heard it. The sounds of something running through the brush. And when I say the sound of something running through the brush, when we initially heard it, it had to be far away, but it was loud. Skip called it. He said, "They're coming. They're headed our way." I said, "What's headed our way?" "They're headed our way." He quickly started walking back towards the truck as the sound got louder and louder. Now, to describe this sound, guys, I have a cousin who played professional football in the NFL, and I've been to the combine. One of the most interesting things about being at the NFL combine is to watch the linemen run, because these guys are big 300, 400-pound men who run the 40-yard dash in like 5.5 and 5.1 seconds. But as they run, their feet make a tremendous amount of noise as they run. The sound that I was hearing was the sound of maybe 4 or 5 of those NFL offensive linemen running through the leaves of the woods, but it was far off. It still was loud. Skip quickly walked back to the truck, positioning himself inside the driver's side door, 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot in the truck. The sound was coming towards that driver's side, so I circled around to the passenger side, opened the door, and stood there. Looking back, I should have put 1 foot in the truck like he did, but I didn't. The sounds got louder and louder and louder, and you could hear limbs and branches breaking. No breathing, no nothing, but we knew something was coming. Skip started to call a distance. 300 yards away, we could hear the sounds. 150. What I hadn't noticed was that he had left the truck running the entire time we were there. 100 yards, 50. The sound stopped. Skip looked over the truck at me and said, "You need to get in." Just as I started to put my foot in the open door, we heard the howl. Now again, like I said, I'm not an outdoorsman, so I can't 100% say that this wasn't a pig or it wasn't something else, but this sounded like a howl of a werewolf on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was loud and it was powerful, and it actually scared the shit out of me. I stood there frozen. My brain wanted me to get in the truck. It told me to hop in the truck and get in, but I was frozen. I stood there, guys. I stood there staring directly into the woods. It was almost like the sound made my nervous system reset, and the signal wasn't going from my brain to my body to move. So I stood there. To be honest with you, I'd never been that afraid in my life. I've never been in a situation where I panicked and just could not move. As I stood there, I saw the truck pulling off out my peripheral vision. Out the corner of my eye, I could see Skip speeding down the road with the passenger door still wide open. Within seconds, he rounded that curve and was out of sight. Now, I'm standing alone in the dark on the opposite side of the road from whatever these creatures are, with nothing there but space and opportunity. For those of you who don't know, Satori is a time when your mind, body, and spirit all are one. Athletes experience this, and people who are in danger experience it as well. It's a sensation of time slowing down. That is exactly what I was caught in. Satori is something I'm very familiar with from being a bodybuilder. However, this time I was unable to take advantage of it. Time was going slow, and I was standing there. It felt like forever as I stood there staring across the road, wondering if something was coming out of those bushes. Now, I'm a big guy. I've had a few too many hamburgers in my life at this point in time. So running is not an option. I know this. My brain told me that we can't run. I looked down the road to see how far Skip had gone, and his taillights were no longer in view. He had clearly made that turn. So I was alone, standing on the opposite side of the road from what I assume is a dog man. I did not see it, but I heard it. I heard the howl, and I heard it coming through the bushes. Standing there was nothing for me to do, so I raised my fist as if punching the dog man was going to be an option. But what am I supposed to do? Time passed, and I couldn't tell you how long it was, and I started to hear the sound of the pickup truck screeching to a halt. In the back of my mind, I was like, good. Skip has figured out that I'm not in the truck. And then I heard the tires squealing as the truck turned around, and I could hear the engine revving as he was coming back towards me. The headlights from the truck lit up the street and the brush across from me, and something big and black moved from left to right. Skip slammed on the brakes, stopping the truck right in front of me, yelling, "Get in, get in!" But I wasn't going around to the passenger side. I hopped into the bed of the truck and he pulled off. The conversation that happened after that was very, very heated. I was pissed that he left me. He was pissed that I was chicken shit enough to stand there while he left me. We argued back and forth for a few minutes, and then actually we started laughing because both of us were scared out of our mind. When we got back to my motel room, we just sat there and had drinks. And I told him, I said, man, I'm not sure what the hell that was. He said it was the dog man. You heard the howl. You heard it coming through the bushes. I told him I didn't see it, though. He said, did you want to see it? I really pondered this question for a few minutes before I answered. Truth is, I don't think I really wanted to see what that was. Based on what I heard, the little flash of blackness that I saw, and the size of the whatever it was moving from left to right, I don't think I ever want to see a dog man. Ever in my life. Okay, guys, so that was my dog man experience that I had out in Taylor, Mississippi with Skip. Just to give you guys a little inside baseball and let you kind of know a little bit more about what happened. I'm never going there again. Like, that experience kind of made me question the whole visiting the site of incidents that people claim have happened. Did I expect something to be there? Yes, I did. But did I expect something to come running through the bushes sounding like the refrigerator Perry, knocking over trees? No, I did not. And it's kind of difficult to explain to you guys the sound. The sound of the howl. It's very, very difficult to explain what it does to your body physically. I've watched some Dogman videos where they talk about infrasound and growls and roars and what they do to you. It freezes you. It's almost like getting hit in the back of the head with a stick, and you're foggy is the best way to describe it. And what I'll say to you guys who listen to this channel who say, hey, I want to go out and go look for the dog man, I would say don't. I would say leave that alone. I'd rather see you go ghost hunting or exercise a demon or go skydiving or deep sea spear fishing and looking for giant octopuses than going out and messing with this dog man. Because I can imagine that had something stepped out of those bushes within that probably 2-minute time span that Skip was away from me, it could have easily came across, killed me, and drug me off, and he would have never found me. So I just want you guys to be careful. It's not all fun and games. Some mean out here in these streets. And don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and also share this video with your friends, because sharing is caring, and we all care. And I will see you guys on the next episode. I'm working diligently to get out these next set of videos. I have 3 Bigfoot encounters coming. Then I pivot back to some real crazy horror stories that I got from a gentleman here locally. So I'm trying to keep it working and keep you guys happy and make sure that you have enough content to keep you scared all night long. I'll see you soon.
All right, now that we've had a chance to hear about what happened to you, are there any inside details about what happened that night you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And you might have to forgive me when I start talking about my encounter, because I may drift off a bit, because it's one thing to tell someone else's story and recreate someone else's story, but it's another thing to talk about what happened to you. So essentially, the conversation I had with Skip when we went back and forth, we did Skype, we did phone, we did email, all those conversations ended with an invite to come to Oxford, Mississippi and hang out with him and then just go to the site of his encounter. And like I said, on my channel, I believe in trying to investigate the stories. You know, I want to verify if it's true or not. You know, I just want to get to the bottom of it. So I decided that I was going to take that trip. So, you know, I stopped by my favorite cigar shop, got me a couple of cigars and hit the road. Ended up spending the night in Oxford and meeting him that next morning. We talked and had breakfast and pretty much hung out and got to know each other, kind of broke the ice. And the ice really broke between the two of us when we started talking about my channel and giving him some inside baseball on a lot of the stories that I have and really giving him the behind-the-scenes things that people don't hear about. And so we ended up heading down to Taylor that evening. I think he picked me up at like 4 o'clock, maybe like 3:45, 4 o'clock. And so while we're riding down that way, we kind of stop and we're looking at these different properties that are owned by property owners where people are saying they're having these dogman encounters. And these are vast pieces of property, and people are having encounters there. And so he's kind of walking me through some encounters that he's heard about, you know, and he's just pretty much educating me on dogman and stuff that he knows. And some of the things that Ed shared with him, Ed being the other lineman that was in the story. And so we work our way to the spot where he had his encounter. And to paint the picture for you guys, it's just starting to get dark. And for those of you who've been in the woods, you know the time of evening when the sun is kind of setting behind the trees right before it goes behind the horizon, but it's still behind the trees. There's a little bit of light. So we're literally standing in the middle of the road. The truck is parked on the side of the road with his door open, his driver's door open, the lights running, lights are shining some light on the road, but we still got a little bit of daylight left. And we're just talking. I mean, we're just standing there talking, and he's going over his encounter. You know, he's telling me about, hey, you know, this is where I was, you know, the rocks hitting the bucket truck. At this point in time, he's very animated. He's using some profanities. He's just opening up to me, telling me his encounter, you know, and he's on this emotional roller coaster where anybody's been on an emotional roller coaster. You know, 1 minute it's kind of like he's okay. The next minute it's like he's breaking down, and it's real sporadic. And while he's standing there talking to me, I noticed that there were 2 crows on the power line. So I'm just kind of taking a look at them. I don't know why I focused on them, and I tuned him out for a second. And these crows are staring directly across the street into the woods. I mean, they're just staring. And as soon as I kind of go to retune into what he's saying and try and turn my attention to him, the birds take off squawking and screaming like they're crazy. And I just started getting this bad feeling. And it wasn't a feeling of doom or dread. I just felt like I was in the wrong place. I didn't belong where I was. And my mind was saying to me, hey, these birds are telling you something, almost like they was flying away like, hey, dummy, you need to leave. What are you doing here? But I don't understand birds talking, but that's the feeling I got. But I felt like I didn't belong in this spot at this moment in time. And so as I'm turning my attention back to him and literally refocusing on what he has to say, we start to hear this sound in the bushes coming towards us. To do it justice, when you say in the bushes, it makes you think that the sound is 10 feet away. But this sound was far out. I mean, this was out in the woods, but it was loud. It was the sound of something moving. And in this video, the best way I could describe it was it sounded like offensive linemen running through the woods. And that's what it sounded like to me. It sounded like NFL offensive linemen running towards me through the woods. And so both of us at this point in time get quiet and we're focused on the sound, and it's coming. And whatever these things are, they're running, and it's loud. And the closer it gets, the louder it gets. And the closer it gets, the more you can tell that it's multiple things running. They're not running on 4s. It sounds like footsteps running, but it's just the loudest sound that I've ever heard. And you can hear, like, I don't know the terminology for like a branch that's on the ground that's dried out and you step on it. But you hear those type of things breaking like crack, and it's echoing and it's coming and it's loud. And so I just say, hey, man, what's that? He says, they're coming. I say, who? He's like, they're coming. And like the way he says they're coming, he's so panicked that he starts backing away and walking towards the truck. And I stand there for a few seconds, but naturally I'm seeing him freak out, so I'm starting to freak out. So I'm walking towards the truck too. He literally gets to the truck, puts half his body into the truck, leave half his body out. I circle around to the passenger side, open the door, but I don't get in the truck, Rick. I mean, like, I don't know why I didn't get in the truck. I can't tell you why. I don't know. I just didn't get in the truck. So I'm standing there on the opposite side of the truck. These things are coming towards the driver's side, but the door is open, but I'm not in the truck. I could have, looking back on it, I could have stood on the edge and climbed up and held on to. I could have did anything, but just standing there. And so he starts calling the distance of the sound. And for the listeners out there, I'm the first to admit I'm a city boy. I'm not the person who goes in the woods. That's just not what I do. You'll never catch me in the woods under any circumstances. And so the sounds are coming. He's calling the distance. I trust him, number one, because I'm out here with him. Number two, because he's a friend of a friend. And so if he tells me it's 200 yards, 150 yards, in my mind, it's whatever it is, it's 150 yards away. And so he counts down to 50, and all the motion stops. There's no sound. There's no motion. There's nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing. It's like all the rumbling, all the running, all the breaking, all of it stops at once. Like it was a coordinated dance where everybody was dancing, and but he has like musical chairs. You know how musical chairs, everybody's running around and the kids' feet are patting, and then boom, everything stops. That's how it was. And we're standing there. And then there's this howl. It's a wolf howl. Clearly a wolf howl. And somebody say, well, you say you're not an outdoorsman. How do you know a wolf howl? Well, I watch documentaries. I know what a wolf howl sounds like. But the sound of the wolf howl was, like I told you earlier in the pre-interview, the best way I could describe it, it was like someone took one of the huge speakers that you have in a nightclub, and he took it on the other side of the tree line and set this speaker over there, and he played a wolf howl through the speaker, one of those 6 foot, 7 foot tall black speakers, and they played it through that speaker, and it was so loud and it was so penetrating that I just froze. I was just standing there because my mind was trying to, I don't know, maybe my mind was trying to process what it was. I can't tell you why I stood there. I mean, I can't. But as I'm standing there, I noticed that the truck is leaving. Like, it's gone, you know, and it's dark now. I'm standing there like a crazy person, and out the peripheral vision of my eyes, I'm seeing the truck leaving me, and I'm seeing the tail lights of the truck go away from me. And as the tail lights get further and further away, it gets darker and darker until he makes the curve, which is maybe 200, 150 yards away. He makes the curve, and I'm just standing there in the darkness. And at this point in time, my mind is gone. I'm done. Like, I'm fried. My brain is fried. And I'm standing there, man, and I could honestly say I've been in some very hairy situations from my youth as a child to my adulthood life, and I've never frozen in any situation. There's never been anything that made me freeze, physically freeze. The feeling that I got was, I think I described it in the video as, like, I was foggy, like someone had hit me across the back of the head, and I was foggy. And it could have been that my adrenaline was pumping and my blood pressure got high. I don't know how to explain it, but all I can tell you is I'm standing in the dark by myself, and I just heard what sounded like 4 or 5 huge animals run straight at me. And in the video, I described the feeling of Satori, which is the feeling of things slowing down. And time really, really, really did slow down for me, because the time frame in which I was standing there, between the time frame in which I was broken out of that Satori trance of time moving slow by hearing Skip slamming on the brakes, it seemed like forever, but it couldn't have been. It couldn't have been anything more than a minute or two. It really couldn't have been that long. As I stood there, you know, there's nothing I could do. My body reacted. I mean, I didn't physically think to put my hands up like to fight. I just lifted my fists up to fight like that was going to do something. And in the video, I've got a little flag in some of the comments because people say I laughed, but I laughed afterwards. I laughed when I was telling the story because looking back on it, it was funny. Like, what are you going to do, fight a werewolf? I mean, that's funny, but in that moment, that wasn't funny. None of it was funny in the moment. None of it was entertaining. They all was very, very frightening. And so I'm standing there with my fist in the air. Something is there. I can feel it. I can't see it. It's dark. I can't see it, but my senses, my body can feel something. I feel something there. It's a primal feeling. It's kind of like maybe it's something left over from before we had all the modern conveniences of lights and cell phones and all those things. But you have a primal instinct that tells you you're in danger. Everything about my body was letting me know that I was in danger. And it wasn't like, oh, somebody might hit you across the head with a bottle. It was, no, something's going to kill you. As I'm experiencing all this and feeling the adrenaline rush and feeling myself feeling slightly dizzy, but all these different emotions and feelings, I hear the truck engine revving. I didn't use a sound for it in the video, and you notice because I couldn't find something that was actually recreated because the sound of the revving engine was so loud to me because it was like it let me know that I was about to be saved. And sure enough, I looked over and he was flying around the curve. Skip was flying in his truck around the curve, and he slammed on the brakes literally right in front of me to where his driver's side door is now in front of me. He's almost face to face with me. He's yelling, "Get in the truck, get in, get in." And I'm not going to run around the truck and get in the passenger side, so I just hopped in the bed of the truck, and he pulled off, and we got out of there. We pulled over a couple miles ahead, and I got in the front, but that was a very heated conversation because I was very upset that he left me. I don't think it was intentional. I really believe that he thought I was in the truck, and based on the way he came back, you know, it definitely wasn't intentional. But when we got back to the hotel room, we talked, man. We drunk so much alcohol, got drunk that night, and we kind of laughed and we talked, and now I understand why people are so afraid of these things. I didn't physically see one. I can tell you this, though. When he was headed back to me and those lights shined on the roadway, started shining on me and lighting up the bushes from the headlights, across from me in the tree line, I could see there were two trees, two pretty relatively big trees. They're about 6 or 7 feet apart. I did see a black mass, and it was a black furry mass, and just to be specific, move from left to right. They moved very, very quickly, but I didn't see the muscle tones, you know, the snout and the eyes and all that of this creature. But I did see something that was 6 to 7 feet tall, I would say 7 feet tall on the high end, move from left to right. And just that little bit that I saw freaked the hell out of me. For those who are listening who may say, oh, well, you could have seen something, you could have seen anything. In the video, you'll hear me talk about Satori, and I referenced it a few minutes ago. I was a bodybuilder. Now, when I say I was a bodybuilder, I lifted very, very heavy weight, 600-pound squats, 450-pound bench presses, huge amounts of weight. And I got very familiar with Satori because it's the process of time slowing down because your mind, body, and spirit are all cooperating as one. It's something that we don't experience on a daily basis anymore because we're rarely in danger. But if you ever talk to someone who's been in a car accident or someone shot at them or someone whose life has been in mortal danger, they would explain to you that everything slows down. A part of the Satori that I was experiencing was that everything was slowed down, and I saw something move from left to right, and it was huge. It was black. It was almost 7 feet tall. I would give it 6'9", 6'11" to 7 feet tall from left to right. I know I saw that. And as much as I try and tell myself, hey, you didn't see anything, to comfort myself, we lie to ourselves and make ourselves feel better. I try to lie to myself and say, okay, well, you didn't see anything. I know what I saw because I know the experience of Satori, and I know exactly what it's like for time to slow down while you're doing something. And it's not unfamiliar to me. I'm very familiar with the sensation. And I know that what happens in that sensation is what really happens. So I know I saw something. Now, did I see the dog man step out and go, roar? No. But I saw something move from left to right. And I don't know of any animal that's 7 feet tall that moves very fast and is black. I don't know anything like that in the woods. Maybe I can Google and find something. Maybe there's some kind of bear, but I don't know. And so that was my experience, and I tried my best to do it justice by bringing it back to life and recreating it in the story. What I can tell you is Dogman and Bigfoot are two things that I don't think I'm going to go do any investigation on. And if I do go do some investigation, I'm going with a couple of heavy-armed people. That's not something I'm going willy-nilly again like that. And the reason why I went that way is because I really didn't believe it. Vic, when we got there, I didn't expect to see anything. Standing there, I didn't expect to see anything. I did not expect to hear anything. I expected to go to Mississippi, start from the beginning. I expected to smoke cigars on my way to Mississippi, hang out with a guy, go through his encounter, talk with him so I can truly get a grip on what was going on, possibly get some more information and talk to some more people, do some more investigative work, smoke some cigars on the way back, and be a happy camper. I did not expect any of that to happen. None of it. I didn't expect any of that to happen to me, and it did. It did, and it scared the hell out of me.
Well, it sure didn't take long for you to get an education on whether dogmen were real or not real, unfortunately.
No, they're real. That's why my video is titled, My Dogman Encounter, They Are Out There. Because I think that people don't understand that this is real. And I can understand the perspective they're coming from. I can understand them saying, hey, these are great stories, but there's no such thing as a dogman. I can see someone being skeptic, and I can understand someone wanting to experience the reality of it. But what I would tell you is, and I can confidently say this, I don't ever want to see a dog man because I'm having trouble with the sounds of those things running towards me. I'm having a hell of a time with the memory of the howl and the sounds and the smells staying with me from that experience. And so to actually physically see this thing with my own eyes and for it to fit the descriptions that I've heard from other people, from my stories, I don't know. I don't want that ingrained in my memory. I don't want that stuck in my memory bank at all. That's not something I want in my mental computer. I just don't want it.
Oh, that's totally understandable. As far as nightmarish situations go, I can't think of how it could be much worse than a situation like that. All alone on a country road like that after dark with 4 or 5, maybe even more dogmen just off the road looking at you. Doesn't get any worse than that. And also, too, I know Skip left you at the start there, but it says a lot about his character when you consider the fact that he did turn around and come back. If you think about how many people would have never come back after they had gotten away, that says a lot about that man right there.
No, I totally agree with you. That's why I can tell you, Skip and I are friends to this day. If Skip needs anything, he can pick up the phone and call me because he did come back. And I really believe, I genuinely believe that he didn't know that I was not in that truck. I genuinely believe that he thought I was there because the way he came back lets you know, left no doubt, and let me know and let anybody else know that he was coming to get me. Because when I say he came flying around that corner, he came flying. Now, he was scared out of his mind, but he came back. And that's the true sign of a brave man. You know, you feel the fear, but you do what you have to do anyway. So Skip goes down as one of the bravest men in my book.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. The fact that he did turn around and come back, that says it all right there. Are there any last bits of information you'd like to share about that story?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is just my message to people who say they want to go out and look for a dog man is don't do it. Just enjoy the experiences of others and enjoy the encounters because the danger that's involved in this is too risky. It's way too risky to go out looking for something that is a killing machine. I mean, it makes no sense because as I stood there on that road by myself, I won't say that my whole life flashed before my eyes. The way I'll describe it is there was no doubt in my mind that my life was in danger. There was no doubt that I had bit off more than I can chew. And what I don't want to happen to anyone, which is why when people say, where exactly in Taylor was this, I won't tell you because I don't want to be responsible for anyone getting hurt. Because you may think that, okay, I'm going out here with an AK-47 or I'm going out here with a shotgun with slugs in it. You may think you're going out there well armed and well prepared to deal with whatever's coming, but it's going to be too late when you realize that this is too much for you to handle. You know, just like for me, it was too late when I finally came to the realization that this was real and this was true. It was too late. There's nothing I can do. I'm standing there. You know, number, space, and opportunity. They want to jump out the bushes and get me. Could have did whatever they wanted to do to me. But it was too late at that point in time for me to do anything about it. And what I don't want to happen to anyone is I don't want anyone to have that epiphany after it's too late like I did. And luckily Skip was the man that he was and the man that he is, and he came back to get me. But, you know, if you go out chasing after these things and you catch a pack of them, because I refuse to believe that you're just going to run into one. Based on what I heard, it was definitely more than one. And based on Skip's account, it was way more than one. I just refuse to believe that you're going to run into one of these things. And if you do run into one of them, there's probably more there. And if you do shoot one, I don't think it's going to really do anything. You're going to need a 50 cal Barrett to do something with these things. So just leave them alone. You know, there are some things that are out there in this world that should be left alone. You know, and let them do what they do. If they want to run around and be dogmen, go be dogmen. Do that over there away from me. And I think that's how we all should treat that situation, Vic. I think we can account for it, and we can talk about it, and we can journal it, and we can track it, and we can interview about it. But I don't think there's anything good about having an encounter. Now, I dare to say there's nothing good about having a dog-man encounter. I can confidently say that. So to save people a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache, just leave them alone. And if you run into one, man, I can't advise you on what to do. Because I just stood there. I won't be a hypocrite and say, yeah, I mean, I stood there. Like, come on, man, I can't tell you what to do.
Well, you handled that situation the best way you could. I mean, think about it. You're in a very difficult situation with no clear answers on how to solve it or whatnot. So, like you said, thank goodness Skip did turn around and come back. If he hadn't have done that, I just wonder what would have happened if they would have let you go or if you would have wound up being a statistic. I guess we'll never know now since Skip did come and pick you up. But having said that, how can people find your channel on YouTube if they want to listen to your show, which I can't recommend highly enough?
Search the Dark Waters channel, and it's Dark, W-A-T-E-R-S channel. You'll see a logo that's a gray logo with a neon green H2O symbol, and that's me. And that's the Dark Waters channel. And I can promise you guys that you will enjoy every story that I narrate. It won't get stale because it's not the same thing over and over again. And it's definitely not some kind of recycled Reddit storylines that are there. These are real people with real stories. And at some point in time, I may bring a few people in and do an interview with them later on down the road, especially if it gets to the point to where people are questioning some of their accounts. I may bring some people and let them do a quick interview, but a lot of these people are severely traumatized from the things that have happened to them. And I'm not just talking about dog man. I'm talking about, you know, people breaking in houses, trying to rape people. I mean, just insane type of things that are happening in our world. But you'll enjoy the channel. You really will. You'll enjoy the channel.
I can't say enough good things about it. Like I said, I've listened to almost all of your videos, not quite all of them, but I can't think of one that wasn't top notch. Thanks again so much for coming on the show to talk about your programs. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Vic.
Thanks.
Bye.